Why am I interested in the art world? I believe all of us should be interested in the art world because it is an expression of human culture and creativity. And so I'm nuts about art generally. And you and I both know you are too. So it's all good. Secondly, I would say that art overall responds to liquidity. Now, as a serious Bitcoin investor, I and you both understand how liquidity ebbs and flows. We're currently in a period where it's going up and getting better. And that's why Bitcoin's doing very well. Art is quite similar. Digital art is also very similar, whether we're talking about NFTs or ordinals. They're highly sensitive to liquidity, and they've been a great buy. Well, not financial advice, but to me, I think they've been a good value in recent years. And I think they are, for a very, very long-term hold, a highly speculative but an interesting play.
This episode of the Bitcoin Economy is brought to you in part by Ledin.
Need cash but don't want to sell your Bitcoin? Ledin is the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, issuing over 9 billion loans since 2018. And they were the first to offer proof of reserves.
With Ledin, you get custody loans, no credit checks, no monthly payments, and more. Visit ledn.io for more information. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Economy. I'm here with Tad Smith in Hong Kong. Tad, we've known each other for a little bit now and interviewed you about a year ago, I'd say. And you're involved in a million things. For those that don't know Tad, former CEO of Sotheby's, Madison Square Garden Group, the Fine Art Group, you were chairman, and then now Doodles, you mentioned. So a million different things that Tad's involved with. If you don't follow him on Twitter, great follow as well. But Tad, I'd love to start actually with the change from 10T to 50T. Give us a quick overview of 50T, why the name change, what are you guys investing in overall?
First of all, thank you. It's great to be here. So 50T Funds is the name of the 4 existing funds, 10T Holdings, 1, 2, and 3, plus 1 Roundtable Partners. They're all renamed in the portfolio of 50T, and we're raising a 5th fund. This is the group of funds for growth equity for digital assets that Dan Tapiero, who needs no introduction in the Bitcoin world for sure, is the founder and CEO and CIO of, and I'm one of his partners. So it's great to be here.
Amazing. If you haven't checked other funds, they're invested in some of the biggest companies in the space. You guys have done a great job. We've interviewed Dan, I think about a year ago as well. So good company, of course. I want to talk to you about a few things. So you've been big, obviously, in the art world, coming from initially Sotheby's, right? And then the Fine Art Group, and now with Doodles. So NFTs have gone through this phase, right? And people kind of think that they're dead. So what is it that engages your interest so much in the art world? And I'd imagine you see NFTs kind of making a comeback here, but in what way?
So that's a really good set of questions. Let me peel them back one by one. The first one I would say is, why am I interested in the art world? I believe all of us should be interested in the art world because it is an expression of human culture and creativity. And so I'm nuts about art generally, and you and I both know you are too. So it's all good. Secondly, I would say that art overall responds to liquidity. Now, as a serious Bitcoin investor, I and you both understand how liquidity ebbs and flows. We're currently in a period where it's going up and getting better, and that's why Bitcoin's doing very well. Art is quite similar. Digital art is also very similar, whether we're talking about NFTs or ordinals. They're highly sensitive to liquidity, and they've been a great buy. Well, not financial advice, but to me, I think they've been a good value in recent years. And I think they are, for a very, very long-term hold, a highly speculative but an interesting play. But interestingly, I don't buy art because I think it's a great investment, although many do find it a great investment. I buy it because it's just a personal thing that I'm very passionate about, and I love to own, and I love to share with my friends and family. So yes, there are beautiful NFTs. They're magnificent ordinals, which of course are on the Bitcoin blockchain. And I think this space is vibrant. I think the artists are extraordinary. And it is at a time when we look at the machine, both AI and robots, increasingly encroaching on what has traditionally been for tens of millions of years human turf. It's really nice to be involved in art, which is emphatically human, and moreover, interestingly, emphatically human with the collaboration of AI and the machines as tools and partners.
Yeah, we are living in quite interesting times with the proliferation, I'd say, with AI, especially with like music too. You're starting to see like AI bots will be the new DJs in this crazy world that we live in. I saw you retweet or quote tweet Beeple. There was monkeys climbing up a green candle. How did you interpret that? I saw the eyes with a question mark, so I don't know if you got to the bottom of that at all.
I forgot how thoroughly well prepared you are as an interviewer. Yes, I did retweet Beeple's very interesting, I think it was Thursday, post on X that had an image of monkeys climbing up a tower, and the tower was obviously getting smaller and smaller as they got to the top. And he made some remark, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it implied it was at the top. So monkeys climbing to the top. So there were two aspects of that that I found interesting. The first one is absolutely legendary sense of humor. And the second one is coincidentally, perhaps coincidentally, on the day before, I bought a Sam Spratt skull that got a little press because it was a high price for Sam Spratt. Sam Skull's work. Look, I think Sam Spratt, first of all, I think Beeple and Sam Spratt are two of the greatest artists alive today, and their expression is digital and they're amazing. And Sam Spratt's stuff, this one really spoke to me. And it happens to be, and of course, one of Sam Spratt's great things is Lucy. And Lucy is obviously not an ape in the way Bored Apes, but Lucy is obviously, how shall I say this? And look, I don't know what people were saying, but I just thought it was a curious day to say that, a curious thing to say. And it was the day before, and it was an all-time high for the skulls of Lucy. So maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it was a sense of humor. Beeple does have a legendary sense of humor. And, but, so I don't know. What do you think? As I said, pair of eyes.
Yeah. I would interpret it as almost like, people following the Bitcoin coming in, maybe they're coming into the top of this cycle. I'd love your take. You've been the CEO of public companies before. What is your overall take on these Bitcoin treasuries? Is there a world in which, we're technically a Bitcoin treasury. We have a small amount for our podcast and for 21 rates. But do you see this world like continuing where there's this proliferation, I'd say, of like Bitcoin treasury companies? Or do you think Strategy, Metaplanet, there's a few winners that kind of take all?
So you had several different points in there, but before I turn to the role of Bitcoin in the treasury of companies, which I think is a really powerful topic, I'd actually like to point out once again for your listeners, Avi, how important what you said immediately before that is, which is you felt more comfortable buying Bitcoin at $120,000 than at $2,400. And on the one level, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? Right? I mean, because one is like 96% less than the other one or 97% less than the other one. And yet, how many times, Avi, have you and I been asked the question by dear friends and family, are they too late? Right? But the irony is, the higher it goes, yes, in a near term, obviously, the potential for it to go down is there. But the probability it's going to go to zero is vastly less. It's been significantly de-risked. I'm not saying you can't lose money with Bitcoin. Goodness knows, a lot of people lost money this week with Bitcoin, right? It's been, soared up to 124 and then dropped to 110. And there were a lot of people leveraged who got crushed. So it is a volatile asset. This is not financial advice. And so one has to be careful. But the Lindy effect, which is the effect that says the longer something's been around, the safer it is, and the more likely it will get to be over the sort of initial investment hurdle, is critically, profoundly important. And you just said it. It is, everything else being equal, has been significantly de-risked, 50 times larger or 45 times larger than the last time you thought about it at $2,400. So that's a really powerful point. Related to that is the point about treasury companies. And I think we need to divide them into three buckets. The first one is companies like yours that have made a decision to say, when they build up cash, to put it in Bitcoin because for them it is a better store of value than treasuries. I mean, you need some cash on hand for your working operations, but if you've got excess cash building up and you don't want to return to the shareholders, it's a very sensible treasury decision to put it in something else. And if that something else is Bitcoin, as a Bitcoiner, you know that that's attractive for you and it works for you and that's fine. That's what I would call that basic treasury maintenance. I wouldn't call that a Bitcoin treasury company. There's a second thing, which is Bitcoin treasury companies that are actually in the business of putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet with an eye to using the Bitcoin on the balance sheet to attract capital. Now, whether you call that a leveraged Bitcoin equity or you call that a Wall Street bit of financial engineering, by the way, I say that with respect, not dismissively so, that's a different looking thing. And there are a number of those companies right now. They're all over the world. And not surprisingly, what one has to look at is how many of them are there? Answer, there are many. And then how are they differentiated? And is that the axis of competition or is it a sideshow? And if it's the axis of competition, what is that axis? How is it differentiated? How do they compete? And if it is a sideshow, then you have to say, well, why, as an investor, would I put money into that? How does it change the nature of the investment? With respect to those for whom Bitcoin is the axis of competition, obviously the most famous one is Michael Saylor's Strategy. Then the next question you want to ask is, to what extent are they differentiated and how sustainable is the moat that they're creating? By virtue of, in this case, Michael Saylor's Strategy, the size and scale of his investment are so great, and the difference of that, it creates opportunities for them, obviously, to financialize the markets with preferreds, but also potentially to use the balance sheet in interesting ways. And the other thing, back to that Lindy effect we were talking about a minute ago, remember that Michael's already gone through one really, really ugly experience in the first bear market. So if anything, he has a Lindy effect. So that to me is a sort of standalone. Then there are numerous countries like the great Metaplanet, for example, in Japan, where there are certain kinds of regulatory barriers that give them a certain leg up. So from my perspective as an investor in these types of companies, I look for what is the attractiveness, what's the differentiation, how do we think about it? And it's really a nuanced approach.
What if you could lower your tax bill and stack Bitcoin at the same time? Well, now you can with Blockware. New tax guidelines from the Big Beautiful Bill will allow American miners to write off 100% of the cost of their mining hardware for a single tax year. That's right, 100%. Blockware's mining as a service allows you to do everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. You get to stack Bitcoin at a discount every single day while also saving for the upcoming tax season. Get started today by going to mining.blockwaresolutions.com/TBE. Again, that's mining.blockwaresolutions.com/TBE. Now back to the interview. Good point on the treasury companies, which begs the question, like, why not just buy Bitcoin? But then you see companies like Strategy and Metaplanet, as you mentioned, they have, I think it's 55% tax in Japan if you were to sell Bitcoin versus just the traditional taxes. That's 20% difference, I think, in Japan or something.
Well, I was lucky enough one time when Simon, who's the president and CEO of Metaplanet, was passing through Florida. He came over to the house for dinner and he described the process of buying Bitcoin through a brokerage in Japan. And if I recall correctly, it was insane. It entailed the mail. Now, this was recently, it was like maybe earlier this year, very early in the year, but it's just so hard. And remember that it's not just the tax thing, which is a huge issue. It's painful. It's so easy to buy shares on the stock exchange through your existing broker. But if you have to go do something else in many countries, in many formats, in many places, right now, just as an example, today, my cousins who live in Idaho and have been very, very long-time customers of a very large, very well-known bank, including investment firm, are having to switch to my firm because they can't buy the ETF in their IRA account. And this is a very large, very well-known branded firm. And this is not this is a national, in fact, it's actually a global firm. And they're switching accounts right here in the United States right this week. So this shows you there's a lot of resistance in the system.
And to that point, I'd say that I was talking to John Hoffman over at Grayscale, and he brought up this huge point that over the next decade, there's like something crazy. I may misquote this, but it was like $20 trillion of capital that's going to be shifting hands from generation to generation. My generation and a little bit younger, everyone's really open to Bitcoin. So a lot of that capital may flow in. I want to get back to Doodles and some of the art that you guys are getting into now. How do NFTs make this comeback? Do you see NFTs move in that direction where it's kind of this community beyond just, the digital community online, where there's going to be in real life events and things like that? You coming from like the entertainment world with the Madison Square Garden group, do you see this up leveling where Nike or some of these bigger companies start to embrace this a little further?
So let me take them one at a time. First of all, I'll go back to something I meant to mention earlier. If I didn't, I apologize, which is I buy art because I love the art. Now, admittedly, once I've decided to buy something, then there's a question about price, and I want to make sure that I don't overpay. And the way to think about that is art's going to depend on the desirability of it, the scarcity of it. Frequently, it entails the narrative behind it. You point out a very powerful aspect of it, which is what is the community aspect of it? Meaning, when you own a particular piece of art, do you become a member of a club? What are the advantages of the club? And then there's the social power of having art. It means having it on your wall, talking about it, sharing it with your friends, whatever the case might be. All of those things create value for art. And then, frankly, it's just beautiful. And then, by the way, there's a whole different aspect in the digital world where you can, by virtue of collecting art that's digital art, get friendly with the artists. And by the way, for a guy like you who's deeply immersed in business, you're a very increasingly successful, prominent entrepreneur. To get close to artists is really, it's like a gift from the gods who dole these things out. So that's one of the great things. Notice I haven't yet necessarily talked about the return on NFTs. From my perspective, when I think about investment returns, I am mentally selling a Bitcoin to buy it. Therefore, the hurdle rate for me is the hurdle rate for Bitcoin. Now, when you ask, just go ask ChatGPT. For people who aren't using leverage, for people who are okay or comfortable with volatility and are invested for the long term, what are the investments that outperform Bitcoin? And that is a very high bar. So what you have to think about is whether you put a dollar that you sold Bitcoin to get into an ordinal, into an NFT, into Tesla, into NVIDIA, into a bond, into gold, whatever it is, chances are those things are going to underperform Bitcoin. So the way to think about art is you buy it if you love it, buy it for all those intangibles, very exciting intangibles, and then try to get it for the best price, try to get the thing you love for the best price, and make sure you understand what you're spending. If liquidity goes in your direction, scarcity, desirability goes in your direction, the narrative goes in your direction, and by the way, the massive, and you pointed this out a minute ago, your generation, thankfully, is coming up. You're going to inherit trillions of dollars from my generation and the boomers above me. Moreover, you're going to create trillions of dollars of wealth in the crypto and the AI economy. All of those things are going to flow into the art market. Anyone who's interested in this, Raoul Pal is probably the leading thinker on how the money will flow through NFTs in art. And whether it's Real Vision or Global Macro Investor, that's a place to find it. And he's got extensive stuff on it. Many of it's free, by the way. You can go get it. But if you're interested, go down that. But in the meantime, all of that means there's a good chance that well-bought pieces of digital art today are going to do what well-bought pieces of contemporary art or Renaissance art or Impressionist art or modern art have done in the past, which is they're going to go up as people get increasingly wealthy over time. And so it doesn't mean any particular art will do. It doesn't mean that they will outperform Bitcoin. And it doesn't, by the way, even mean that certain types of art will outperform the stock market or even the QQQs, the NASDAQ. But it means that if you buy what you love, you'll always love it.
Last question. We're kind of going out of order here, but where do you think the dollar goes in 10, 15, 20 years from now? Do we live in a world where we can convert these all to stables and we move to this digital dollar and Bitcoin becomes the gold? That's the narrative a lot of people in our space kind of think. You coming from two public companies and being in the business world, you're also a professor at NYU, I believe still. What are your thoughts just in general from a macro perspective? Do we move to this world where it's everything's on the digital dollar? Will dollars still exist, to some capacity? And if so, do they disappear in 20 years from now?
You saved best for last, didn't you? Wow. I'm trying to figure out how to answer this without being controversial, and I don't think I can. So the first thing I would say is Jack Dorsey's captured a lot of attention lately, saying that the idea that Bitcoin as a store of value only can be attractive over the long term is really not very well thought through, and that it has to be a currency or unit of account as well. And I'm not sure I buy that. Gold has hung around for thousands of years, and it is principally operating as a store of value. There have been periods where it's operated as a currency, but not in recent years, and that's doing fine. And so what I think you would see is with Bitcoin, you're going to see it as a powerful store of value. I think increasingly you're going to see the underlying platform of Bitcoin have a lot of innovation and growth on it in ways that are interesting. But chances are we're going to need something. Now, maybe it's Satoshis. There are 100 million or so per Bitcoin. So possibly that. Chances are we're going to need something that I want to part with. And let me tell you, I'd much rather part with my dollars than with my Bitcoin. Until that changes, I mean, just think about the conversation we just had a minute ago about art. If I've got dollars lying around, I realize I could always put the dollars in Bitcoin. So it's sort of a false dichotomy, but play with it for just a minute. In my mind, just emotionally, if I'm parting with dollars for a piece of art, I think, oh, okay, that's fine. The art will outperform the dollar. If I'm actually selling Bitcoin, I know that's the intellectually correct way to think about it because it's the opportunity cost, right? I just made that argument. It's still psychologically different. From my perspective, the dollar is powerful. It serves a great purpose, and the purpose is exactly what you said. It is for commerce and transactions, and moreover, it proliferates. So it's really available for the community all over the world to do it, and stablecoins make it every bit as valuable in Nigeria as it is in New York City, and that's also important. What I think about a lot is what about the other currencies? And on those, I'm not so sure. So look, to say the dollar will always be here, forever is such a long time. I mean, how many times have we called forever? Or by the way, never is the opposite of forever. Both are often wrong. It wouldn't surprise me if the dollar evolved in a lot of different ways. But I think what is going on now with the dollar is strong for the dollar over the long term. Although I'm not optimistic about the dollar and the currency markets in the near term, I think it should continue to weaken.
Yeah, you brought up a good point too. Just to wrap that up, we just spoke with Hive Digital CEO, and he was talking about how he wants to start talking in sats more because someone's 16 years old, they don't have enough money to buy a single Bitcoin, right? And that's kind of that mental barrier for a lot of people. But if you start talking in sats, I just joined a fantasy football league with a bunch of Bitcoiners from Minneapolis, and instead of paying $100 for the league, it was 100,000 sats, right? So it's a little bit more, and I was like, this could be a pretty prize here at the end. You never know at the end of the year. So. Anyways, thank you so much.
100,000. By the way, I just want to say the problem with the sats, right, is there's so many of them. The numbers are just crazy right now, right? And Bitcoin's going to have to get way up there before they stop sounding like the Weimar Republic. Yeah. I mean, 100,000 sats, what'd that buy you? A cup of coffee? 100. Exactly.
Tad, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll have to have you on again. So thanks so much.